Welcome, and thank you for joining us for Contemporary Art Taos 2020, the Artist Interview Series. The series consists of short interviews between myself and the artists of this exhibition and is released twice a month for the duration of the show. I'm Nicole, Curator of Exhibitions and Collections at the Harwood Museum of Art, and joining us today is Solange Roberdeau. Thank you for being here, Solange.
Hi, good to be here.
Solange actually has an original commission in this exhibition entitled World Through the Body, Body Through the World, 1 through 6. The work is made of sumi ink, acrylic, and 21 karat moon gold leaf on shiramine paper. It's actually in 6 different parts, one of which is behind me, totaling 30 inches by 170 inches, and it was made site-specifically for the Agnes Martin hallway, which is the hallway right outside of the Agnes Martin chapel room. So Solange, let's talk basics to start. Tell us about the process of creating these works.
Well, that work specifically, of course, so it was, as you said, it was made for that, that hallway. And so I was thinking about the pacing, the visual pacing between the pieces of paper that would make up that installation, meaning I was thinking about the spaces between the papers, and then in that way using the wall as part of the composition. And then also I was thinking about scale, and I was thinking about people moving through the space and how their own experience would be when they were looking at the work. And the way I made those pieces is a little bit like printmaking. I have a printmaking background, and I've noticed that in the last few years, my tendency is to move back toward printmaking tendencies a little bit. And so to create a sort of organic feeling in those pieces, they're made up of kind of drips and large areas of solid ink, to create that effect without it feeling contrived and like I was trying to control the little marks. I would paint on a surface and then press my paper into sections of it. And that way it was a controlled process, but it also felt very organic. And so I would let that dry, and then I would make another layer on a surface and then print again to get different tones. And my thinking around that was to create images that would have a sort of spaciousness. So if I had varying grays with the sumi ink that I was using, that could create this sort of push-pull distance feeling that I'm really interested in, because it starts to feel like, it starts to feel more visceral. It feels like the way I feel when I'm in a big expansive landscape, like in Taos, for example, on the Mesa, or out, I'm actually in Northern California now, so out in Northern California on the ocean, there are these big visceral kind of expanses. And so I was trying to communicate that. And then another technique in creating that feeling was to also then add a harder geometric line. And that line, to me, kind of created this friction, this visual sort of friction between the organic splatters or drips and that line. And that helped to kind of push, again, visually kind of push between things. And it also felt linear too, just in a time sort of way, or cinematic or something, because your eye wants to follow it. And that made sense for that hallway too.
Absolutely. That experience of walking through the hallway and seeing them one by one is such a part of the piece. So you learned how to use gold leaf by working with Robert Kushner, founder of the pattern and decoration movement of the 70s and 80s, and probably the most famed contemporary artist to work with gold leaf. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience?
Sure, yeah. I just feel so grateful for that experience, because it's obviously really influenced the way I'm making work now. And we still have such great friendship. Bob is a really generous person in being somebody to work for. So I feel really lucky and really thankful for that experience. I was living in New York and, you know, juggling 4 different jobs. And I ended up connecting with Bob when his studio assistant left, and we just really hit it off. And my primary job in his studio was applying gold leaf to his and copper leaf to his paintings. And so he has a really particular contemporary version of that technique. So the technique is ancient, and is often used in religious or icon paintings. But Bob was using it just as a sort of element, like a material element in his paintings, as a formal element. And so he had replaced the base coat that is traditionally used in gilding, which is the application of metal leaf on a surface. That base coat was traditionally an iron oxide colored clay, and he replaced it with the same color acrylic. And so what that did was it kind of loosened things up, and it made it less about this really specialized technique and more about a sort of painterly element that could be incorporated into paintings. And I think I worked with him for about 6 years doing that. So yeah, it was a lot, you know, it was a lot of metal leaf application, and that was really interesting. And Bob uses a lot of patterns from different cultures all over the world in his compositions. And so that was also something that I feel I really benefited from experiencing and looking at with him, because we would do a lot of tracing of different Suzanne patterns, or we deconstruct kimonos and then use elements of the kimonos in compositions. And so that was also a really, really interesting process. But I was after we began working together, I applied for grad school, and I ended up getting into a program that I absolutely love in Baltimore, and at the Maryland Institute College of Art. And that program in particular is really conceptual, and that's really what I needed. It was kind of what I was looking for. There was a lot of art theory, and it was a really difficult program, but really, really wonderful. But it was also really nice to be working for Bob. It was a low residency summer program, so I was doing all of this heavy conceptual art. We were looking at a lot of minimalist artists and land artists and process artists. And so I was thinking and reading about all of that, but then also working full time for somebody who, you know, was part of the pattern and decoration movement and has a complete appreciation and understanding of all of those artists and conceptual art, but was also coming from a different perspective too. So it was really nice to have that balance. Actually, I feel like that was a big part of my grad education, that balance between the two.
That's so many incredible influences.
Yeah.
Another influence, I've seen you on different occasions pairing your work with quotes from poetry. For this work, for example, you provided a Mary Oliver quote that I'll read. The dream of my life is to lie down by a slow river and stare at the light in the trees, to learn something by being nothing. Again, that was by Mary Oliver. How does literature and poetry specifically play into your work?
Well, I think I was kind of trained from birth to appreciate poetry and literature, because my parents are both writers. My dad's a screenwriter and my mom is a poet and has actually done readings at the Harwood. And so I grew up listening to a lot of poetry readings and reading a lot. And I think that I'm attracted to poetry, especially in prose, because of the ambiguity in I don't know, because of the ambiguity that's there. There's all of this space for the person who's reading to enter into the writing in this way that's open, and I feel like that I'm not sure how to articulate it beyond that. But that feeling is something that I'm really drawn to in the work that I make. This sort of, using things that feel familiar, if they're forms that I find in the landscape, or materials that are recognizable, but then kind of shifting them just enough so that there's the potential for other interpretation. So I guess in that way, poetry and prose and, literature in general is kind of important to my practice, and maybe just the foundation of my practice, I think.
I love that communion. It really, I don't know, it adds so much when viewing the work to think about the poem also. I think it's a lovely pairing.
Yeah.
The language that you use to describe your work often, as well as just the experience of viewing it, it feels like this communing of nature and divinity. Are you interested in exploring the sacred or the mystical in nature?
Gosh, I think it's a really interesting question, and I think that I'm really attracted to exploring the idea of creation, and I don't know if it's as much about divinity or the sublime or something like that, but it is about a moment, of ambiguity and movement and creation. So in certain ways that's divine, but it's not as much about something more sublime, or divine in that way, I guess. Sure if that
Last
answers.
question, and every artist gets this question. This
Yeah.
exhibition was limited to artists from Taos or with deep roots in Taos. What is your connection to this place?
I think I first came to Taos in 2012. My mom was doing a residency at the Wurlitzer, and I visited her for a while, and I went back a couple times during her residency. And she's actually done several residencies there, and I applied after I first visited her, and then that brought me back to Taos multiple times. And I just fell in love with it there. I just really connected with people there and with the landscape, and so I kept going back after 2012, and so eventually I decided to try to create some sort of sustainable, permanent income there, so that I could really be there and be more invested in the place. And so I started a teaching space called Second Sea Studio, and the grand opening was about 2 days before the lockdown last year. So it was poor timing, but it was interesting. I mean, that didn't work out, but I have such a strong connection to my community there and to the place that I'm sure I'll just figure out another way to be there more permanently. But that's
Well,
kind of it.
thank you, Solange, and thank you all for joining us on Facebook Live. This is actually the last of our interviews in conjunction with Contemporary Art Taos 2020. The exhibition will be up through May 9th, and this interview series is available on the Harwood's website, Facebook page, and YouTube if you've missed any. Hope to see you at the museum soon.
Thank you.